Hi, this is Casey, pastor of Quest Church Community of Grace. Thanks for watching or listening to this message today. If it blesses you, helps you, encourages you, I invite you to do two things. Number one, please share it with somebody else. And number two, if you don't already, consider partnering with us financially. We are 100% supported by gifts like yours. You can give online at questwire.com. You can download the Quest Church app and click the Give button, or you can mail a gift to us here in Urbana, Illinois. And now, here's today's message.
Welcome again to those of you who are joining us via live stream. My name is Casey. We're glad that you're here this morning as we begin this new series for the Christian worship season of Lent. You know, what do you imagine when you hear the word servant? And what comes to mind? Is it a positive? Is it a negative thing? You know, maybe for some of us there is a negative aspect to this idea of being a servant. Maybe you imagine somebody who's kind of a lowly person who has to be at somebody else's beck and call. You know, they're going to ring a bell and you're going to come running. You know, maybe you think of like the help in Downton Abbey or a doorman in New York City. Maybe it does sound negative to you. Maybe you think about the word servant and servile, and then they sound very similar. And maybe you're thinking about being in service to somebody else. Maybe that sounds like the opposite of freedom. And everybody wants freedom, right? You know, we've all been watching news coming out of Ukraine, and you know, we've seen this scrappy nation fight off an aggressor many times its size, and I think it's filled a lot of people with this kind of primal urge to be free and to cheer on somebody else fighting for their freedom. There's something in us that instinctively resists being forced to serve somebody else. So maybe it's a negative connotation that you have. Others of you, maybe you think servant and it is something that's kind of positive, and you hear servant and you maybe think of public service or being a public servant. You know, politicians and government workers are often referred to as public servants. And so maybe you have this positive picture in your mind. And many people do find something positive and meaningful in public service. I was reading the other day about Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? And so when Arnold's a younger guy, he's famous for being a bodybuilder and then for becoming an A-list actor in Hollywood. But then later in life decides he wants to go into public service. And, you know, and he's the governor for, you know, California. It's California, you know, for a number of years. Come on, that was a good attempt. I mean, give me something on that. Jeez. Thank you. Yeah. But, you know, he goes into public service and he finds this, at least, you know, by what he said in interviews, as something really meaningful. And in fact, he told other people, he said, help others, give something back. And he says, I guarantee you will discover that while public service improves the lives of others in the world around you, its greatest reward is the enrichment and new meaning that it will bring to your own life. So, you know, here's somebody who saw being a servant as something really positive. But, you know, of course, when you're a public servant, you're out not just serving the public, but you're kind of in the public eye. And so how does it change your perception of being a servant if nobody sees the service that you do? Is it as meaningful if no one's there to, you know, cheer you on for doing good? Or what about people who do a lot of public good? And, you know, they're known for helping many, many people. Maybe they lead a foundation. They help total strangers. But then the people closest to them say, but yeah, they're a total jerk. You know? And you know, definitely churches have had their fair share of people, like in my role, who, they look like they do good, but then, somebody like Jeremiah be like, yeah, he's terrible to work with, I mean, yeah. So I mean, there's this inconsistency sometimes between people doing public good and what they do in private. So, but what do you think about when you think about being a servant or service? Well, the Bible talks about voluntary service as a good thing. It does not look favorably on involuntary service, but voluntary is a good thing. And in fact, many people in the Bible proudly put the label of servant onto themselves. To be a servant of God was a good thing. The Apostle Paul described himself in his letters as Paul, the servant of Jesus Christ. And of course, Jesus himself wore this label of being a servant. And he actually said, and we're going to look at this in a couple weeks, where he said it. He said, I haven't come to be served. I've come to serve, and even to give my life for other people. And in fact, Jesus really kind of turns on its head what leadership means. We're going to look at that too. But also he redefines what it means to be a servant. And in fact, I would argue Jesus was the pioneer behind the concept of servant leadership. It's kind of now taken on its own life in kind of business and management, but where does it come from? Well, it comes from Jesus. And it is the fact that Jesus himself models and redefines what it means to serve. That's one of the reasons why we've chosen as one of our 5 core values at Quest this idea of everybody on mission, everyone on mission. About a year ago, we went through this process of discerning what do we want to be true about us as a church? What are the ideals that we want to aspire to live into? And one of those was this idea of everyone on mission, which behind that is this idea of being a servant. Or here's what we go on to say about that. That ministry is not for the chosen few. Every believer is called and gifted for ministry. Pastors and other church leaders equip people to be a part of God's mission together. And our ministry together, we want it to be all hands on deck and high participation. Our work together propels us out into the world for compassion, service, and evangelism. In other words, we want to be a church where all of us feel like we are getting our hands dirty serving other people. Because that word ministry and service, they're the same word. If you're reading the Bible and you see them talking about serving somebody, then it could just as equally be translated as ministry. And so when Jesus begins his public ministry, he's beginning his public service. And recently I told our lead team, I think that this is the value that we need to focus on this year, the whole year long. I believe God wants us to be a church with a heart for service. And I would even say, if I had my answered prayer, that we would even be a church that has a reputation for serving people. Yeah, in big ways, but also in small ways. I do not believe that God wants churches filled with religious consumers. What is a religious consumer? Well, what's a consumer? Consumer is somebody who consumes. In a way, it is kind of a passive thing. Somebody else creates something, and then I'm just on the receiving end of it, right? You just lay it on me. And so in a religious setting, that means that somebody's just throwing religious stuff at me, and I just sit back and take it. Now, let's be honest. What we're doing right now, there is a passive, consuming element to that. Right now, I'm the guy up front talking, right? But this is supposed to be active, not just consuming. That hopefully you're receiving something, but in a way that it becomes a part of your life that inspires action. And I believe God wants us to be a church where we are all serving. We are all doing ministry. It doesn't mean that everybody's preaching from the Bible every week or singing songs, but that in the ways we're gifted and in the places we are placed, that we are serving other people. And so during this season of Lent, we are going to look at the life of Jesus, because he is the servant king. So all during Lent, we're going to kind of chronologically move through the life of Jesus, starting from the beginning of his public ministry all the way up to the cross on Passion Sunday or Palm Sunday, and look at how Jesus teaches us to serve. So that's a long-winded setup for the whole series, but we're going to begin looking at the beginning of Jesus' public ministry, his public service. We're going to look today at the gospel according to Mark. Mark chapter 1. This is going to be on the screen, but if you've got a Bible, you can turn there. It's also listed for you in our worship guide. There's a clickable link. Or if you're here in person and need a Bible in readable English, we have some of those available at the back of the room. They're totally free. You don't have to check with anybody. Just grab one, take it with you. Nobody's going to stop you or tackle you in the parking lot after church for doing that. Okay. So when you open up, we've got 4 Gospels at the start of the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Mark's the shortest because Mark is like big on energy, and he doesn't waste time. He doesn't tell you about Jesus' birthday or his bar mitzvah. He doesn't tell you what his favorite food is. It's just, boom, here's Jesus. You know, he just came out of the Jordan River. He's dripping wet with water, and he's out, and he's doing stuff, and he's helping people. And after 3 anonymous decades, here he is. And he just kind of very publicly puts himself out there. He's baptized. He starts public speech making. And he's gathering students around himself. And very early on, he goes to Sabbath day worship. So he goes to a setting much like the one that we're in right now. And while he's there, there's this guy that just starts acting out, and Mark says he was demon-possessed, and there in front of God and everybody, Jesus tells that evil spirit to get lost, and then boom, the guy's fine. And this causes a little bit of a stir because it's a Sabbath, and some people see this as work. But Mark tells us that the news about Jesus spread quickly throughout the entire region of Galilee. And so right away, though, we see Jesus helping somebody. Right away, from the very beginning, we see that Jesus is about helping people. And we also see that he's not afraid of being out in front of people. He's not afraid of the attention that comes with that. In fact, one of the reasons why Jesus did these public miracles was so that it would make people curious, not just to be healed or to have miraculous food, but so that they would use that as a pointer to go deeper connecting to God. And you know, we see some of this today, maybe not people doing miracles quite the same way, but we do see public figures out doing good, right? Doing public acts of charity. Sometimes we call this philanthropy. We see someone donating money for a building on campus, and it's going to be the Adam Tarr Center for Sports Medicine or whatever. When he donates $50 million, he's squirreling away. We don't know anything about. Or when Bill Gates donates all this money, to increase access to vaccines around the world. Or when Oprah donates millions to bring young women into her leadership academy. Or when LeBron James donates money to do neighborhood revitalization. I mean, these are all very public acts of service. And they're good and they're helpful. But again, we've heard stories, right? We've heard stories of people that do these great deeds for people and they help so many people, but then, behind closed doors, they're like, man, Blake, he's terrible. He's so mean to his wife. He's not. But we know about that. And so I think at the beginning, Mark is kind of setting us up to go, well, what kind of person is Jesus? He helps people in public, but what's he do when the spotlight's not around? What's he do in private when nobody sees? Well, let's look at what Mark tells us. Let's look at Mark chapter 1, verse 29. This is what Mark tells us. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. So Jesus has been with some of his very first students. It doesn't look like he's got like the 12 picked out yet. But they go to Simon Peter's house and to Andrew's house in Capernaum, right on the edge of the lake, the Sea of Galilee. By the way, there's a good chance archaeologists have actually found this specific house if you go visit there today. But this is probably where Jesus is living. And it's probably a pretty good bet that there's a handful of other people living there too. So, I mean, you already know it's Peter's house and Andrew's house, and apparently Peter's married. Maybe Andrew's married. Maybe they have kids. We don't know. But we know that the in-laws, the potential grandparents, they're living there. Now, to you and I, that sounds like a lot of people, right? That sounds like public. When you have 12 people over to your house, you're like, this is now a sort of public event. I got to clean and prepare. And you wouldn't want all those people there for that long. But that was family. That was an intimate setting for them at the time. All of these people sharing space. And Mark goes on to tell us, verse 30, that Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever. And they immediately told Jesus about her. So, in their mind, they're like, Jesus just helped this guy at the synagogue, and now he's back home with us. Do you think that he will help Mom the way he helped that guy? And again, this is a moment, like, this is going to tell us something about Jesus. Who is he? What kind of guy is he? He tells us that we should love other people and help. Does he do that, though, only when other people are looking? Or does he do it when other people can't see? Does he walk the talk? Verse 31. So Jesus went to her, took her hand, and helped her up, and the fever left her. Now, think about it. Nobody's around to ooh and ah, right? What's he gain? What's his movement gain by this? There's not hundreds and thousands of people to see this and go, oh man, did you see what Jesus did? I think maybe we should listen, learn a little bit more. Maybe we should be his followers too. That's not going to happen. The person he's helping is what I would call almost anonymous. Like, we know kind of who she is, but we don't know her name. But we know she's not in charge of a nation, of a territory. She's not an emperor. She's not a president. So if something happens to her, it's not like, there's going to be national catastrophe and social disorder. Jesus, by helping her, he's not going to stop the Roman taxation. He's not going to stop the corruption down in Jerusalem. How big a ripple is this going to be in the world by just helping this almost anonymous person? But he does it. He does it. And see, when you and I read the Bible, one of the things you got to ask yourself is why is that there? Right? The authors of the Bible were smart. And I believe that they were also motivated and moved and led along by God. So I don't think the stuff in the Bible is there by accident. So when there's this little bit, you got to go, well, why is this there? So think this through with me for just a second. Okay? So Mark's gospel, what church tradition tells us is that as the apostle Peter got older, there's a guy named Mark who's his helper. Right? And Mark sees the writing on the wall. And Peter's getting old. And it's really cool to sit around and listen to Peter tell us the stories about, when Jesus miraculously made these bread and fish multiply, or they're out on the sea. and Jesus calms the storm, or when Jesus is back from the dead. But guess what? Peter's got an expiration date. I got to start writing this stuff down. And so he's listening to Peter tell these stories, and he starts to organize them. And back in the day, they've only got so much space, right? Because they're writing on scrolls. So it's kind of like when you get an assignment in school, and they're like, it's 2 pages, 12-point font, double space, no more, no less. I know we've got a writing teacher in here. He knows what I'm talking about, right? And, you've seen those people that abuse those, but he couldn't. So Mark's got limited space to do this. So he's got to be very selective. What am I going to tell, Jim and Sonny? What do they need to know about Jesus years from now? I got to be really picky about this. I mean, all the stuff that must have happened over 30 years that we don't know about. And to think to all of that, Mark's like, I got to tell this story about when they healed Peter's mother-in-law. Why? And I wonder if it's not to show that Jesus will help people. He'll serve people, even when it's not going to win him applause. Even when nobody else is going to see. Even when it's just one person getting helped. Because he's the same guy you see in public as you see in private. They're the same. He has a heart for people. And yeah, it's not feeding 5,000, but it's a little act of love that makes a difference in one person's life that tells them, you matter. You matter to God. And this is just part of who Jesus is. He helps. Mark goes on to tell us in verse 32 and following, that evening after sunset, the people of the town brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. That's a sermon for another day. But you see, Mark is saying this is who Jesus is. In public and private, he helps people. He serves. His public ministry looks like the service that he does when nobody's looking. All right, so let's step back from that for a second. Think about today. What do we celebrate? We celebrate really big acts of charity and of service, right? It's a big deal when somebody donates millions of dollars and they start a foundation that helps thousands of people. It's going to be on the front page. And there's the temptation, right? If you're creating this public persona, and I think that this is increasingly true, I'm going to say more so for people my generation, but especially for people my kids' generation, to create this public persona of yourself on social media. So when you do something good, you want to take the selfie, right? And put it on Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok so people can see, well, I mean, look how great they are. But I think most of us know that it's the often unseen little acts of love that tend to make the most difference in our lives. Right? I think back to when I was a sophomore in college. And at this point, I'm there. I've told people I'm going to go into ministry. I haven't really had a chance to do anything to do that yet. And then some guy comes up to me and says, hey, so would you like a job doing ministry every week? There's these 6 churches out in the country, and we've got 3 people that preach, and they go on a rotation, and we like to have a young person going into ministry do this. I'm 19, 20. And would you like to preach every single week? And you get paid for it. I'm like, yeah. And let me tell you, that was a public service those churches were doing to me and to you. Because do you know how good sermons are by 19-year-olds generally? Not awesome. But I think they knew they were helping out people who were trying to kind of develop those muscles and those skills. But it also gave me the opportunity to meet the head pastor named Pastor Jim. And he's unmarried, had no kids. But he showed so much care for a young set of newlyweds who were looking to go into ministry, right? So when I'd have to go by every week and pick up the printed church bulletins, nobody but us knew that he was going to leave a dozen farm fresh eggs there, or, some homemade jam for us. I mean, he's not getting a pay raise. He's not getting a gold star on his annual pastor evaluation for this. Nobody knows he's doing that but us. But it was a little act of love. Or he'd take us out for lunch once or twice a month, this young, broke, newlywed couple. And it said, you matter to somebody. You matter. You know people like this, right? I think of another friend of mine who, no matter where we're at, he just gets up and he helps, often doing like cleanup. If there's a birthday party or something, you've been to birthday parties, right? Here, kids, there's cake and ice cream. And you're like, now 5 minutes later, there's just a plate full of runny ice cream and half-eaten cake. And somebody spilled red punch. And, he just goes and cleans that stuff up, takes the trash out. He's going to wash some dishes. No, who asked him to do it? Nobody. Who's like cheering him on? Nobody. Just does it. And you know people like this, right? You've probably been on the receiving end of people who just do these little acts of love, right? Just like Peter's mother-in-law. And I'd look at those people and I think, how did they get like that? Maybe some people are just a little more hardwired that way, but I wonder if it's like just it accumulates over time. They do the little act and it kind of leads to the next one and so on. And then it is habit. And so I begin to wonder this question, what if a heart for service grows best with little acts of love? What if what's going to grow that heart of Jesus that serves in us is not just going out and doing like really public acts of service, but what if it's the little acts of love that we get to show people every day? Maybe that was true for Jesus too. I mean, I highly doubt that just like when he's 30 years old, he's like, well, I better clean up my act, start being nice to people, helping people out. I've been kind of a layabout around the house. I'll pick up after myself. Well, this is probably something that's woven into who he's been for a long time. When I think about my friend, I want to be like that. And I think about Jesus, and I think I want to be like that. And if I want to do that, then I've got to start looking for those opportunities to show the little acts of love. And so who's going to be on the receiving end of that? So for most of us, it may be somebody sitting next to us today. It's going to be family. It's going to be friends, a coworker, a neighbor, a fellow student, someone we teach, who teaches us. Maybe somebody you just run into every day when you go to the grocery store, every time you go to the grocery store. You can make a big difference in their lives, not because you gave them thousands of dollars or whatever, but because you just gave them a little act of love. So do you want to do that? Do you want to love and serve the way Jesus does? If so, then begin to look for little acts of love. Here's what I would challenge you to do today or this week before you forget. Sit down and think about who are all the people that I tend to run into on a regular basis throughout the week. Right? The people you see on a regular basis, there's probably some consistency to it. And then as you do that, begin to brainstorm, what is something I could do that would just be a little act of service for that person? Okay? If you're a teenager or a kid at home, you just may say, you know what? I'm just going to go wash the dishes before they ask me to. My friend Erin, I think she had a viral TikTok video about this, guys, that if you do that stuff for your parents, you'll be amazed at what they'll do for you in return. Parents, same thing. I mean, what if you just do a little act of service? And I know so much of parenting, you feel like that's what it is. But what if you did something out of the ordinary? Or all of us would just surprise somebody with a handwritten note of appreciation. Jeremiah, you sounded really good on Sunday morning. I don't know if I've told you that recently, but here you go. Take somebody out for lunch. Bring coffee to the people at the office. Brainstorm those little acts of love that you can do. And then here's the thing. Begin to pray for an opportunity to follow through and to have the courage to do it. And you know what I found in my life? When I consistently begin to pray for those opportunities to connect with somebody, to help somebody, God provides a way for me to do that. Those are prayers that God wants to answer. And here's the thing, then we're done. When you begin to do this, when you serve other people, you're going to inspire them to serve as well. Look back at verse 31. This is where Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law, and it says, the fever left her, and she began to wait on them. Wait on them is a weak sauce translation. It's actually, she began to serve or to minister to them. Again, remember, same word. She's on the receiving end of ministry from Jesus. And she thinks, he's helped me now. I want to get up and I want to do ministry to him and for him. That's what happens, right? A little act of love grew a heart of service. And I think as we do this for other people, it's going to stir that in them. God's going to grow it in them too. When you serve like Jesus, you inspire something amazing in other people because a heart for service grows best with those little acts of love. Would you pray with me? Jesus, we thank you for coming to serve us. We are on the receiving end of the good that you've done. And so as we begin to look at your life, Jesus, and we look at the beginning of your public ministry, we're inspired to do these little acts of love for other people too. God, would you take away any desire that we have to win the applause of other people for doing good? Would you give us a boldness and a comfort in doing little acts of service for people when nobody's watching, when nobody's going to pat us on the back? God, help us to see the people in our lives in close proximity to us, maybe even people that we haven't really noticed. Help us to see how we can serve them in simple ways, and then give us the courage to step out and to serve like Jesus serves us. We ask this in his name. Amen.